Imagine spending $5 trillion fighting for a small piece of land thousands of miles away, and losing. Welcome to the Crusades, one of history's most expensive endeavors. From 1095 to 1291, Europe poured unimaginable resources into the sands of the Middle East. But how exactly did the Crusades bankrupt Europe? How could medieval wars possibly cost the modern equivalent of $5 trillion? Buckle up, because today we're uncovering the shocking financial disaster behind the Crusades. It all started in November 1095 at Clermont, France. Pope Urban II delivered a fiery speech, urging European knights to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. Urban promised Crusaders full remission of sins and eternal salvation, a ticket straight to heaven at a price. The response was overwhelming. Over 60,000 Europeans mobilized instantly. But this was no organized army. It was chaos. Nobles mortgaged their castles, sold land, and drained their treasuries. Knights pawned family heirlooms and took massive loans from moneylenders, charging staggering interest. To finance just this first crusade, Europe spent about 150,000 kilograms of silver, equivalent to billions of dollars today. Entire noble families were driven into debt. Worse yet, many Crusaders never even reached Jerusalem, dying en route of starvation, disease, or bandit attacks. Europe's economy took its first devastating hit, and this was only Crusade number 1. But how did Europe raise this astronomical sum? Easy, by emptying its own coffers and borrowing heavily from merchants and banks. Wealthy Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa saw huge profits. They loaned money at staggering interest rates, essentially inventing a medieval version of war bonds. Venice alone made so much money lending to Crusaders that it became Europe's financial powerhouse for centuries. But borrowing wasn't enough. Kings imposed brutal taxes called the Saladin tithe, stripping peasants and nobles alike of their wealth. Entire kingdoms went into debt. Fast forward to 1187. Jerusalem fell to Saladin, and Europe panicked. The Third Crusade was launched immediately, led by 3 kings: Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip Augustus of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of Germany. It became history's first truly international financial disaster. Richard taxed England into near collapse, famously joking he'd sell London itself if he found a buyer. He liquidated royal estates and borrowed heavily from Italian merchants. Altogether, historians estimate the Third Crusade alone cost Europe the equivalent of $1 trillion today, including equipping thousands of knights, building fleets, and maintaining expensive supply lines stretching over 2,000 miles. Worse still, on his return, Richard was captured by a rival Christian duke and ransomed for 100,000 pounds of silver, approximately $3 billion today. This single ransom nearly bankrupted England, leading to decades of financial instability and oppressive taxation. Despite the immense cost, Jerusalem remained out of Christian hands. But it gets worse. By 1202, Europe was financially exhausted, yet Pope Innocent III called for another crusade. This Fourth Crusade had no money left. Desperate Crusaders approached Venice for ships, but couldn't afford the transportation fee. Venetian merchants, led by Doge Enrico Dandolo, saw an opportunity for massive profit. Manipulated by Venice, the Crusaders attacked not Muslims, but fellow Christians. In 1204, they brutally sacked Constantinople, the richest Christian city, stealing priceless relics, gold, silver, and treasures worth an estimated $500 billion today. Instead of reclaiming Jerusalem, Crusaders shattered the Byzantine Empire, destabilized trade routes, and enriched Venice beyond measure. Europe paid dearly. Debt skyrocketed, trade suffered, and trust between Christian kingdoms vanished forever. The Fourth Crusade wasn't just costly, it was financial and moral bankruptcy rolled into one. By 1291, after nearly 2 centuries of crusading, Europe's economy lay in ruins. The combined costs of the Crusades had reached an unbelievable total: over $5 trillion in today's terms. But what did this economic collapse actually look like? Kingdoms across Europe were financially crippled. France and England entered decades of severe debt, forced to impose crushing taxes on peasants already living on the edge of starvation. Wealth inequality exploded, creating deep social unrest that eventually erupted into rebellions across Europe. Interestingly, while the rest of Europe suffered, Venice and Genoa thrived. These cities profited immensely from war financing, becoming the continent's new economic hubs. Their banks became Europe's most powerful institutions, loaning money to kings and nobles desperate to repay Crusade. Debt's trade routes across the Mediterranean were severely disrupted, causing prices to soar. Agricultural production collapsed due to depleted workforces and drained resources. Historians note that Europe's economic growth was stunted for generations, setting back development and innovation by decades. In short, the Crusades didn't just fail to secure Jerusalem, they destabilized Europe, permanently changing its economic landscape and leaving scars that took centuries to heal. But it wasn't just the famous Crusades that drained Europe's coffers. Several lesser-known Crusades added immensely to Europe's financial burdens, each uniquely disastrous. The Albigensian Crusade, 1209 to 1229. In southern France, the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars cost millions of medieval livres, billions today. The 20-year campaign devastated the prosperous Languedoc region, destroying trade, vineyards, and industries. Southern France took centuries to recover. The Baltic Crusades, 12th to 15th centuries. In northern Europe, the Baltic Crusades, waged by the Teutonic Knights against pagans in Prussia and Lithuania, consumed immense resources over 3 centuries. Thousands of knights required armor, weapons, and expensive fortresses in hostile lands. Historians estimate costs ran into hundreds of millions of silver marks, today worth tens of billions. The Children's Crusade, 1212. Most tragically bizarre was the Children's Crusade of 1212, when thousands of European youths marched towards Jerusalem, believing they could peacefully reclaim the Holy Land. Instead, most were lost at sea, enslaved, or died of starvation. This heartbreaking disaster was financed largely by desperate families who sold possessions to fund their children's doomed journey, contributing further to economic hardship. These lesser-known crusades further drained resources and deepened Europe's financial wounds. Every crusade, famous or forgotten, added to the unimaginable cost, leaving Europe impoverished and vulnerable. Today, the Crusades remind us of what happens when faith, power, and unchecked ambition collide. Pope Urban's dream of uniting Europe under a holy war instead resulted in financial devastation, fractured kingdoms, and widespread poverty. The $5 trillion spent chasing Jerusalem reshaped Europe, not with glory, but with lasting debt. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, subscribe, and let us know. What other historical event deserves a financial breakdown? Until next time.